let's begin by opening a public hearing on House Bill 2995. And Rep. Gelser, would you like to kick us off after a little intro by Victoria?
No. Thank you. Members of the committee, House Bill 2995 requires each public university, community college, or other institution of higher education to allow students, faculty, and staff to identify sexual orientation on forms used to collect demographic data.
Chair Harker, members of the committee, good morning. Thank you. For the record, my name is Sarah Gelser, State Representative from House District 16, which includes Corvallis and Philomath. I wanted to thank you for scheduling a public hearing on House Bill 2995, and I also wanted to thank my constituent, Stephen Leiter, for contacting me with a request for this bill. Stephen is a passionate advocate at Oregon State University for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered students. Last year, he sent me a copy of a new California law that allowed students and staff the option to identify their sexual orientation on forms used to collect other demographic information, such as gender, race, disability, or ethnicity. House Bill 2995 would do the same for Oregon college and university students, faculty, and staff. The reason this bill is important is that it recognizes that just like other underrepresented and minority groups, like women, racial minorities, and people with disabilities, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered students face unique challenges. To provide effective services and supports, colleges and universities, policymakers, and advocates need reliable data about the rate of acceptance, graduation, and dropout rates. Just like we use data for other demographic groups, we can use this information to measure disparities and determine what services and supports work to improve outcomes. A good example is the recognition in the last century that girls were significantly underrepresented in school athletics. In response, Congress passed Title IX, part of which required schools to collect data on the participation rates of girls. This gave policymakers the ability to first measure the effectiveness of Title IX in increasing opportunities for girls, and second, to hold educational institutions accountable for ensuring they are providing equal opportunities that encourage and support girls to pursue athletic activities. The Education Committee held an informational hearing on Title IX in the interim and used the statewide and national data to look at what was working in schools and how to do better in schools that had lower than average participation rates. We could not have had this conversation without reliable data. As we talk about how to support LGBT students in their academic pursuits, data about their participation and rates and dropout will be critical. When the idea was first brought to me, I did have some initial concerns about student privacy, but the questions, according to this bill, would be optional, and information collected after acceptance will be covered by FERPA, and the goal is to use the data to benefit students. There's a great panel here to talk to you today about why this bill is important. I hope you will give it your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Rep. Gelser. We'll certainly give it our consideration. Thank you for bringing it before us. And if there are questions right now for Rep. Gelser, fire away. Otherwise, she's got to get to another committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Well then,
Thank you
go and get the panel up here. I have 4 people signed up. I heard rumor that perhaps one of them, Stephen Leiter, who was just referenced, is not yet here. Is that correct? Okay, so let's have C.M. Hall, Lindsay Wilkinson, and Emma Calloway. Please. And I'll leave it up to you 3 to decide who goes first. Whoever goes first, please start by identifying yourself for the record.
Good morning. My name is C.M. Hall, and I work as faculty and staff at Western Oregon University, and I'm alumni from Western as well. I just wanted to say thank you so much for holding a hearing on this House bill. Thanks also for the opportunity for me to be able to testify in support. As I mentioned, I work at Western Oregon University. I also coordinate a federal grant focused on sign language interpreter education standards at Western, and I teach in the sign language interpreting degree program, as well as a course for the sociology department, a lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender studies course. And I've worked in higher education on and off for over 20 years, but consistently at Western for the last 7. And I'm also a proud member of the Board of Directors of Basic Rights Oregon, which is our state's leading advocacy organization for gay and transgender communities. We represent tens of thousands of Oregonians from every corner of this state, and we are strongly urging passage of this House bill. As explained in Representative Gelser's testimony, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but I'd like to just echo the importance. According to Too Afraid to Learn, a 2008 survey of over 3,500 Oregon college students, a hostile campus climate has a significant impact on gay and transgender students. 1 in 10 gay and transgender students took more than 5 years to graduate due to anti-LGBT sentiment. Over half of gay and transgender students concealed their sexual orientation on campus for fear of personal safety, discrimination, or rejection. And more than 60% of all students reported witnessing instances of homophobia, ranging from homophobic language to violence. I do a lot of public education at Western in a lot of different courses, health education courses, sociology, criminal justice courses in relation to LGBT terminology, sensitivity. And I work very closely with our LGBT student group. And I have seen progress over the last 20 years when I was an undergraduate student at the university coming out, but it still exists. And to be able to document and track efficacy and graduation rates and retention rates, and having that option for students to give us that information about themselves, I think is really helpful for us to be able to continue to foster an educational environment. As university staff, this data collection matters to me both personally and professionally. I do want all students to get the support they need to thrive at Western. Faculty and staff strive to provide this support individually. Collecting this data on the experiences of students, faculty, and staff would help our institutional practices catch up to our individual practices. Clear, consistent data collection would allow Oregon colleges and universities to accurately assess and appropriately address the experience of gay, lesbian, bi, and transgender students, faculty, and staff. This House bill would allow students, faculty, and staff to identify their sexual orientation on these forms as an option, helping us collect demographic information without mandating collection. This House bill allows colleges and universities to replicate the successes and address disparities, and that strengthens, in my opinion, Oregon colleges for all of our students. Basic Rights Oregon, as I am representing them, supports this House bill, and we urge the committee to move it forward. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, Chair Harker and members of the committee. If it's all right with you, I'd like to testify and then be excused so that I can make it to another bill.
Certainly okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Emma Calloway. I'm the Legislative Director for the Oregon Student Association, and we have 2 student stories today that we're going to submit by written testimony, and I just wanted to share some of their stories on campus. The first is that one of our students doesn't really feel comfortable sharing her sexual orientation on campus, and she really struggled with the idea of telling you all about her story this morning. And I think that that is reflective of the fact that although we've come very far, I think that our campuses are still not necessarily collecting the data on our campuses about our students, and students don't feel like their sexual orientation and their experiences related to that are something that they can talk about openly, is something that the campus wants to know about them. And it's interesting how data collection can really be such a simple way of acknowledging the important experiences that are, an everyday experience of our LGBT students on our campuses. We think that this data will be very helpful in a number of ways academically, as we've already heard, and we also think that this will be helpful in our healthcare centers on campuses as well, in terms of actually improving health outcomes and helping people get to class and be healthy, productive members of our community. So I will leave you with that and just say that this bill is very important to our LGBT students on campus. The Oregon Student Association has an LGBT justice arm of our organization, which is made up of LGBT leaders across all of our states, across our state and across all our campuses, and they are very supportive of this bill. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and we hope that you do consider your support and a yes vote on 2995.
Emma, let me ask one question before you leave, and if somebody else wants to answer, that's fine, but I want you here just in case. Given what you've just said about the reluctance of some of these folks, some of these students to talk openly about their sexual orientation, do you think that if we provide this box where it can be checked, that we will get meaningful data? We'll get some data, and if you could include in the answer any reference to what's gone on in other states or nationally, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you, Chair Harker and members of the committee. I think that checking a box will still be optional, absolutely. And so students will choose whether to out their sexual orientation. But these forms are kept in, some forms are kept confidentially, and those students would have information about when those forms are confidential. Some forms are kept publicly, and then students would have information about when their sexual orientation would be public to members of the rest of the community. So I think having that choice allows students to have an early conversation in their development and in their education about when they do want to be open and out, and when they do want to be able to help the university, move through that part of their of a university's history and their institution.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Sounds like you better head to another committee. Thanks.
I'll just respond quickly to that question as well before I get started, if that's okay.
But introduce yourself.
Sorry, my name is Lindsay Wilkinson. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Portland State University. And I think that's a really great question, kind of methodologically, but I just quickly would say that really any surveys, all surveys that we have are optional. So I think that's an issue that's really inherent in any sort of survey methodology that we have. But definitely an issue, and particularly maybe an issue as we consider the format of the questions and what the question looks like, and also informing people of confidentiality, and et cetera. So yeah, as stated, I am an assistant professor at Portland State University. I teach courses related to gender and sexualities, education, and quantitative methods. Perhaps more relevant to this discussion. I also conduct quantitative research on the well-being of sexual minority youth and young adults. And unfortunately, data that allows researchers such as myself to assess the educational outcomes, experiences, and needs of gay youth and young adults, but particularly at the post-secondary level, is in really high demand and is really lacking. We really just have, there's quite a dearth of this data out there, data available. And even much more so in the case of transgender young adults. We really just don't have a lot of data related to transgender young adults. So that's why I'm here today urging you to pass House Bill 2995 to provide Oregon the opportunity to be at the forefront in the use of evidence-based research to serve gay and transgender students in higher ed. So while gay and transgender college students are often quite resilient and successful, this population, as others have suggested, is also at greater risk of academic disengagement, poor educational, occupational, and health outcomes, etc. I think all of this has been very much well documented in the research. So understanding the needs and experiences of gay and transgender college students through better data collection and analysis will enable us to use our scarce resources to better serve this population. So I first started in this area of research. I used data, the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, which is actually the first nationally representative sample of youth and young adults that included any information about sexual orientation and their educational experiences outcomes. So I'm specifically GPA, dropout rates, high school graduation, whether or not they go to college, whether they stay in college, et cetera, et cetera. There's just not a lot of data out there that connects these two, measures of sexual orientation and measures of educational outcomes, progress, retention, et cetera. So we've really learned a lot using Out Health over the years, particularly as it relates to K through 12 schools, policy related to transgender youth, not transgender youth, gay youth and K through 12 schools. But again, we just don't have a lot of information about what happens to these youth once they get into college, kind of besides whether or not they go. I've worked with a group called American Educational Research Association, who has really brought together a bunch of social scientists and researchers such as myself, and we're currently in the process of putting together a report urging policymakers such as you at the federal level to include these questions on current surveys, so surveys that already exist, that have already been funded by the government. So to include really simple questions about sexual orientation on these surveys to get some data that we really need, that we could really use. And again, this is a relatively simple and cost-effective way of collecting this important data. So using the surveys that are currently in existence. So much of the current knowledge that we have about gay and transgender students in post-secondary experiences is based on small convenience samples, are often plagued with methodological issues, selection bias, small cell sizes, lack of a comparison group, et cetera, which really call into question the validity and reliability of these findings. So if we're going to use data to try to serve these students, it seems like we should try to use data that is most reliable and valid as possible. Given, I acknowledge that there are methodological issues in any way we decide to do this. So if we put these questions on some of these forums in institutions of higher ed in Oregon, we'd basically have the opportunity to not get a sample, but actually a census. And again, of course, it depends on who chooses to identify and not. But we have the opportunity, a really awesome opportunity, to potentially have a census of these students and not a sample, and not be plagued with many of these methodological issues that we have been in the past. And again, I'm not going to repeat, what some of the other panelists have suggested, but there are some really important implications of this and some really important lessons that we can learn to better serve transgender and gay college students in Oregon. So again, I urge you to pass House Bill 2995 to kind of lead the way in accessing, collecting this data at the state level. So thank you.
Thank you. And
Mr. Chair?
yes, sir.
Ask him some specific questions.
Of course. Take it away, Rep. Greenlee.
You're talking about matching the survey data now with other data. Is that right?
I'm not specifically saying that that's something we would do in Oregon.
Well, but
Is that
the purpose of this is to get you the data so you can match it with outcome data and other data. I mean, you're making a research case to argue for having this data available for research, is that?
Yes, well, depending on what forums the questions would be asked on, and then what forums are currently in existence, yes, the opportunity would be available, as we do for other underserved minority populations. Right?
There were some issues, I assumed, heard some issues about confidentiality and the concern that the data, while given on a form for use, I mean, my assumption would be that it wouldn't be specifically identifiable to an individual. You're arguing that the value of the data is that you can link it, you as a researcher can link it with other data. Does that cause confidentiality concerns?
I mean, it would be similar to anything else we would do in terms of race, ethnicity, or gender, and it would be at an aggregate level, so you wouldn't be able to...
Well, gender is not a very confidential issue, I mean, in its ordinary terms, so I don't think I mind if you know my gender is male. I might mind if you know my sexual orientation if I gave it in what I considered was a confidential manner. Does this bill make that data available for anybody to access?
I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to this.
I can answer that question after I read and introduce myself, if you'd like.
Let's step back.
Does that work for you?
Yep.
Okay, and I am willing to bet that you are Stephen Leiter. Is that
Yes,
true? Okay, so sure. Why don't you grab a microphone and identify yourself through the microphone?
My name is Stephen Leiter, and I am here today to testify in support of House Bill 2995 regarding gathering demographic data concerning sexual orientation in higher education. Presently, I'm a graduate student at Oregon State University in the Master's in Interdisciplinary Studies program. My 3 areas of study focus on women's studies, ethnic studies, and adult higher education. My research focuses on the experiences of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer students seeking to replace lost familial funding after being dispossessed by parents following the student coming out, which is the self-disclosing of their sexual orientation or gender identity, or being outed, someone other than the student revealing their sexual orientation or gender identity to family. For 6 years prior to beginning my graduate studies, I was professional faculty at Oregon State as Director of LGBT Outreach and Services within the Office of Intercultural Student Services. For 8 years prior to moving to Corvallis, I worked at UCLA's LGBT Campus Resource Center as a Student Affairs Officer. Altogether, I've worked in the field of student affairs in American higher education for 15 years. I proposed to my representative, Sarah Gelser, that she sponsor the legislation that ultimately became House Bill 2995 because, as a result of my graduate research and my work as a graduate student affairs professional, I came to realize there is virtually no demographic data anywhere in higher education literature about LGBTQ college students. In contrast, we have large bodies of knowledge on many other student populations, including Black and African American students, Latina, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, Native American, Indian, women, parent, graduate, commuter, veteran, older than average, non-traditional, community college, athlete, engaged, disengaged, low socioeconomic status, privileged, gifted, profoundly gifted, mental health challenged, disabled, differently abled, first generation, returning, transfer, reverse transfer, international, rural, urban, suburban, remedial, and other college student populations. These bodies of knowledge grow larger by the day. This is not the case with our body of knowledge about LGBT students. This dearth of demographic data severely hinders any kind of empirical research from being conducted about this largely invisible student population. Consequently, we have no idea how successful our efforts at recruitment and retention of LGBTQ students are, nor do we in the Oregon higher education community have any idea about the graduation or dropout rates of LGBT college students within the state. These are the most basic evaluative units by which success or failure of access and equity judgments can be made in our education systems, and yet we can't provide answers to these simple questions and most basic questions about admission and completion rates. At a time when we in higher education are being asked to justify our budgets and prove the success of our education programs, this is an important shortcoming within the system, one that is overcome by passage of this simple piece of legislation. It enables us to gather data that will help us to evaluate and assess the success or failure of our current programming efforts on behalf of one of the state's most underserved and invisible college student populations. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Again, I urge your support for House Bill 2995.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think you wanted to return to the question that Rep. Greenlick had asked?
Yes. At Oregon State, one of the questions on the admissions documents is the option to identify the student as male, female, or transgender, and to self-explain what that means to the student. So we're already asking that particular question at Oregon State, and a number of people in student affairs are already working on adding additional information. This bill gives us the opportunity to gather this kind of data either in the aggregate or individually. And it would come under the protection of FERPA, like all other information that's gathered. In fact, it would become protected even from the parents of the student at the time that the student matriculates. So the suggestion is that the student be asked this information at the time that they actually join the university, and that is when FERPA kicks in and protects that information.
And protects it from researchers? Or sociology professors?
That remains to be seen. That would be up to each individual campus, and the student, because the student has the option of answering that question or not answering that question, that would be up to the individual student.
One quick follow-up. Would the student know that that would be accessible to others? They came to answer the question.
For the most part, students are not as concerned as people our age are about being asked that question nowadays.
Well, we had testimony that they are.
Yes, that's true, but not all students, and that's why this information would be optional on the form. If you're concerned, you're not going to answer that question because you know it's optional. Additionally, we know that the primary time which young adults come out would be between the ages of the beginning of high school and the end of college. They don't all come out at the age of 18. Some of them may come out at 19, 20, 21. They may not come out until they actually graduate. So this is a body of numbers that will change frequently, because there will be students who come to the university or the college without having thought about their sexual orientation or their gender identity. The exploration of those identities usually takes place in the college or university, and a whole new understanding, self-understanding, comes about as a result of taking classes, discussing new concepts and ideas that had never been broached in high school or amongst family members or even in the larger community.
I have my answer. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Rep. Gallegos, one question, and then we've got one more person to testify on this, and I see that Rep. Witt is here for the next bill, too. So.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I just want to comment on the fact that, I think what you're bringing to this committee is a critical and significant step forward in terms of cultural competence. And what it's really doing, to me, that the larger significance has to do with really bringing the state of Oregon into the 21st century. I think that it really is an important step in terms of recognizing a stigmatized group, a group that, we still have racism in this country. We still have prejudice against groups of color, but it really is sexual minorities that have the highest rate of prejudice currently. And so I think that as I said, this bill has much more significance than simply data collection. It is providing recognition of a disenfranchised group, and in that is an empowering of that group, a group that continues to have high rates of suicide among teenagers and young people, a group that has high rates of substance abuse, addictions, and all sorts of things that come from being a stigmatized and disenfranchised group. So I appreciate this bill coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Okay, thank you, panel. Jody Weiser, you want to come up and testify on this as well? Brad, are you in a time crunch?
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I guess Vice Chair Harker and committee. I want to give you a personal story.
Identify yourself, please.
Jody Weiser, and I'm here as myself, not as Tax Fairness Oregon. So I wish our society was where it is now, 22 years ago, when my former daughter-in-law entered college, because she didn't come out until after 10 years of marriage and the divorce. And she dropped out of medical school within 6 months of the marriage. And what I saw is two wonderful people who were struggling to try to be a couple, and two people who are so much happier now with new partners. And I think that just being faced with a question on the form, and what happens when you start recognizing other people around you, is really helpful for people to figure out who they are. I have a doctor friend who was 65 when he started cross-dressing at work. That was a really long time to have hid who he was. And I think it's really important to make it more comfortable for people to be the people they are, because they're going to be much better at contributing to the society if they are comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments on this subject? If not, thanks to all who testified. I will close the public hearing on House Bill 2995.